Today we're going to be talking about one of the major systems found in the body, and that is the skeletal system. The skeletal system, like all systems, has a very important function, and it has more than just one function that it serves. Also, like the other systems of the body that we've talked about, it has a direct connection to other systems. So it works in close cooperation with the muscular system. So the muscular system and skeletal system, sometimes referred to as that musculoskeletal system, they work in tandem with one another to move the body around and to provide support for the body. So the skeletal system itself is going to protect the body. It's going to help give the body its shape, right? If we were to take all of our bones, we wouldn't have any shape to speak of. Also, it's going to provide a lot of protection for our internal organs. So if you look at a lot of our internal organs, they are surrounded by our skeletal system. So our rib cage, which surrounds our heart, and a lot of our digestive system, our skull, which is obviously protecting our brain, and then even our vertebrae, which is protecting our spinal cord and that sort of thing. So we've got a lot of protection involved in the skeletal system as well. Obviously helping us move around, right, and navigate the world around us. But it's also going to be a storehouse for minerals, and also within bones, especially within the bone marrow, that's where we're going to produce new blood cells. Okay, new red blood cells are going to be produced in the bone marrow. So it's easy to look at it and say, oh, bones, they help us move around, but it's got all those other parts that are working together. So when we look at a human skeletal system, we can divide it into two main regions, and that is going to be the axial skeleton. So that includes our skull, the backbone, and the ribs. Okay, so that's kind of our central skeleton, our head, our abdomen and our back. Torso area, and then our appendicular skeleton, which includes our arms, our legs, so basically our appendages, and then pelvis and shoulder. So there's lots of bones in the body. There's over 200 bones in the body, but those are the major two sections of them. And so that's kind of how we divide up the skeleton when we're talking about the entire system. So start with a little bit about the bones themselves. The bones develop through a process called ossification. The bone is actually going to start as cartilage, and that's when we're babies, and then that's slowly replaced by bone. So babies have bone that is malleable. It's flexible. This helps in the birthing process. So you don't have something that it won't give at all. So that bone will bend, or that cartilage will bend, and most of that starts to harden into bone pretty quickly. But we do have a spot there, the top of our head, a baby's soft spot. That's where the bones are coming together and they haven't fused, so that will actually stay soft. That can stay soft up to 18 months to 2 years of age before that completely solidifies into bone. So the bones themselves are made of living tissue. Okay, so that's mainly going to be salts, calcium, phosphorus, and then that salt's going to be surrounded by a protein fiber, which helps support the bone. Like everything in our bodies, they're made up of cells. So we have bone cells that make up our bones, and that's going to be, again, that living tissue. We don't want the bone to be old and dead and brittle. We want that bone, even a bone that's completely mature and completely solidified in your body, has a little bit of flexibility to it. Not a lot, but a little bit, to where we can take the impact of jumping and falling and doing those types of things, because we don't want them extremely stiff and extremely brittle, because then we have a situation where we're breaking bones all of the time. So we want them to have a little bit of give. The outer layer of the bone is called the periosteum. Blood vessels are going to run through the bone in these little tubes, which are called haversian canals, into the compact bone. In the spongy bone, which is a different type of bone, this is the most central part within the bone. The bone marrow that's where we're going to find it. Okay, we're going to find the bone marrow in basically the middle of our bone. And that's where we're going to be producing our red blood cells. And we know our red blood cells are responsible for carrying oxygen all throughout the body. So, and we produce an enormous amount of red blood cells, just an overwhelming number of red blood cells. We're talking in the millions per second. These red blood cells are being churned out. So, and bone marrow is the site where all that takes place. So we've got this bone, we've got a hard outer layer, and then inside that bone, we've got this spongy bone where we're primarily producing the red blood cells. Within the skeletal system, we have a lot of different joints, and that's how these bones move. So at these joints, most of them are going to be connected through some structures called ligaments. Ligaments are the structures that connect a bone to a bone or cartilage to bone. In contrast, we have tendons in the muscular system, which then connect our bones to the muscles. But for the skeletal system, we're talking about ligaments. So if you hear, someone talking about like they tore their ACL, okay, that's the ACL is the anterior crucial ligament on the knee. Okay, and that's one of the big ligaments in the knee. So when you tear that, essentially it really inhibits your ability to move your knee. Okay, and if it's completely torn, then you don't have the ability to move your knee. So you have to, go in and either repair that or replace that in one way or another. But that's what they're talking about when they say ACL or MCL or any of those types of areas. They're talking about that ligament. So some of the joints that we have in our body, that we can group them up into immovable. Okay, that's one group, and they don't allow any movement. Okay, the two bones have basically come together and they are fused, and this would be like the bones in our skull. If you were to look at your skull, you would see, if we were looking at a top view of our skull here, okay, you're going to see lines like this coming together, showing where that fusion happened. Okay, where those bones fused together, and that soft spot is usually kind of in the center towards the back of your head. That soft spot is usually going to be somewhere around where all those bones meet. And like I said, that's going to solidify as you get a little bit older. We have some joints that are slightly movable. So the bones don't ever really fuse together, but they allow a small bit of movement. An example of this would be like the bones in the lower leg. So our tibia and fibula, that's a slightly movable joint. Most of them though, and the ones that we're most familiar with, are what we call freely movable. Okay, or movable joints. These allow movements in perhaps two directions or perhaps more, depending on the type of joint. And we have 4 different types of freely movable joints. And so we're going to take a look at each one of those individually. The first type of joint that we have that allows movement is what is called a hinge joint. Okay, and a hinge, just like a door hinge, is going to allow movement back and forth. So if we think about our elbow, okay, this is a hinge joint. I'm moving it back and forth one way and another way. And then the knee operates on that same kind of joint, right? The knee is going to move back and forth. So that's two directions. The next type of joint that we have that allows movement is a ball and socket joint. So just as the name implies, one bone is going to end in a ball and the other bone is going to end in a socket and kind of accept that bone, and then it allows that bone to rotate around inside that socket. So that would be something like our shoulder joint. Okay, so instead of just my shoulder being able to go like this, I can go like this, or I can go forward and back. I can go around in circles. I have a lot of movement with a ball and socket joint. So that's our shoulder, where our humerus, the top or head of our humerus, is connected here. The humerus has the head and the ball, and then the socket is coming off of our rib cage here. And then our hip would be the other example of the ball and socket joint. Our femur, at the head of the femur, that's going to snap right into our hip. You can dislocate these type of joints a little bit easier than other, because what happens is that ball gets pushed out of that socket. So if you dislocate a shoulder or you're dislocating a hip, what they're talking about there is that that ball has actually slipped out of that socket. Okay, and it's moved out of that joint. It doesn't really happen in your elbow or knee because you've just got the one kind of movement. Usually if you've got damage there, it's going to, a bone's going to break. It doesn't really pop out of place. Not that it can't happen, but it's not nearly as common. Another type of movable joint is what is referred to as a pivot joint. So a pivot joint is something that allows an object to move or bones to move like this. So in our wrist, okay, this would be a normal hinge joint if it just went like this, but we've also got movement here. Okay, so it's not a ball and socket because there's no ball and there's no socket. This is just a pivot joint, which allows us to do quite a bit of movement. We also have one of those in the top 2 vertebrae of our back, of our spinal cord there, which allows us to move our head, right? Because my head is not just plugged in to, it's not like the end of my head has a ball and the vertebrae has a socket. It's a pivot joint. And then the last type of joint, which we don't see a lot of, is what's called a saddle joint, and that's basically because the shape of the joint is like a saddle. So this would be at the joint at the base of your thumb. It's actually called a trapeziometacarpal joint, and so what that allows is a lot of movement in our thumb. Again, it's not a ball and socket joint, so it just allows your thumb to be connected to the rest of the metacarpals here in your hand and allows for quite a bit of movement. So those are the 4 different types of joints, the freely movable joints that we have in our body. As far as the structure of the joint goes, cartilage is going to cover those surfaces where the 2 bones come together, and that protects them from damage. And then, like I said, where those 2 joints are, you usually have a ligament connecting that bone to bone, or perhaps bone to ligament. There's going to be a joint capsule which surrounds the joint and helps hold those bones together. The outer layer is made of strips of tough connective tissue, which we call the ligaments, and that's going to connect to the periosteum, so connect to that outer layer of the bone. The inner layer is called the synovial cavity, and that is filled with synovial fluid, and that allows those surfaces of the bones to slide over each other smoothly, and it kind of acts as a tiny shock absorber, because if we didn't have some type of shock absorber, or we didn't have that synovial fluid, then we're going to get friction against those bones, and that's not what we want. We don't want our bones being worn out by just the simple actions that we're doing. So that pretty much takes care of our skeletal system. Again, in addition to movement, it provides a lot of other necessary functions for the body.